The morning sun beat down on Fort Henderson as a dusty pickup truck pulled through the main gate. The guard barely glanced at the young woman behind the wheel before waving her through. She looked too small, too quiet to be heading to the combat training facility. Captain Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her truck and took a deep breath. The Arizona desert air was dry and hot, just like she remembered from her last deployment. But this wasn't a war zone. This was supposed to be home. Fort Henderson was where she'd grown up, the daughter of a military family. Now, at 32, she was back as an instructor for the new Special Operations Training Program. Sarah kept her head down as she walked toward the administration building. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a simple t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. The orders in her pocket said to report to Building 7 by 0900 hours. She had 15 minutes. "Hey, sweetheart, you lost," a voice called out behind her. Sarah turned to see three young soldiers, probably fresh out of basic training, standing near the obstacle course. They wore matching grins and cocky attitudes that came with their new uniforms. "I'm fine, thank you," Sarah said quietly, turning back toward her destination. "The commissary is that way," one of them shouted, pointing in the opposite direction. "Unless you're looking for the daycare center." The other two laughed. Sarah felt the familiar burn in her chest, the anger she'd learned to control over 12 years of service. She'd been the only woman in her unit more times than she could count. She'd heard every joke, every dismissive comment, every assumption that she couldn't handle the job. "I know where I'm going," she said, still walking. "Sure you do," another one called out. "Bet she's somebody's wife got turned around." Sarah disappeared into Building 7 without looking back. The cool air conditioning was a relief, but her jaw was still tight. Major Davis sat behind the front desk, his gray hair and weathered face showing his 30 years of service. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, barely looking up from his computer. "Captain Sarah Mitchell, reporting for duty," she said, placing her orders on the desk. Major Davis looked up, his eyebrows rising slightly. "You're the new combat instructor." "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long moment, and Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes. She was 5'5", maybe 130 pounds. She didn't look like the battle-hardened veteran her file said she was. "Well," he said slowly, "training starts tomorrow at 0600. Your class is already assembled. 42 recruits, most of them male. Think you can handle it?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said firmly. "Your quarters are in Building 12. Here's your keys and your access badge." He handed her a folder. "The orientation meeting is at 1500 hours in the main briefing room. Don't be late." As Sarah walked across the base toward her new quarters, she passed groups of soldiers. Some ignored her, others stared. A few whispered and laughed. She heard the words diversity hire and political correctness float through the air. She'd been here before in different places, different bases, different countries. Being underestimated was nothing new. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see by looking at her, was what she'd done. The missions she'd completed, the lives she'd saved, the medals that sat in a box in her storage unit because she never felt right wearing them. Sarah unlocked her quarters and set down her single duffel bag. The room was small but clean. A bed, a desk, a closet, everything a soldier needed. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her phone. One message from her mother. "Be safe, sweetheart, make us proud." Sarah smiled sadly. Her father would have known what to say. He always did. But Colonel Robert Mitchell had died 2 years ago, his heart giving out after too many years of stress and too many deployments. Her mother had left the base shortly after, unable to stay in the place that held so many memories. That's why Sarah had requested this post. Fort Henderson had been her father's last assignment. She wanted to honor his memory by training the next generation of soldiers the way he would have wanted. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Yeah," she called out. The door opened, and a young female private stood there looking nervous. "Captain Mitchell, I'm Private Emma Rodriguez. I've been assigned as your assistant for the training program." Sarah stood and shook her hand. "Good to meet you, Rodriguez. How long have you been at Fort Henderson?" "6 months, ma'am. I'm excited to work with you. We don't have many female instructors here." "I noticed," Sarah said dryly. Private Rodriguez smiled. "I should warn you, ma'am. The men in your class, they've been talking. They requested a different instructor when they heard a woman was assigned." "Did they now?" "Yes, ma'am. They said some pretty harsh things. I just thought you should know." Sarah nodded. "Thank you for the heads up, Rodriguez. I'll see you at the orientation meeting." After the private left, Sarah changed into her uniform. She looked at herself in the small mirror. The captain's bars on her collar, the patches that marked her as airborne qualified, ranger qualified, combat veteran. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Sarah, being a soldier isn't about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about heart. It's about never quitting, no matter what they throw at you. The briefing room buzzed with conversation when Sarah walked in. 20 officers and senior enlisted personnel filled the chairs, most of them men with years of experience etched into their faces. The talking stopped when she entered. Sarah found a seat near the back and sat down. The man next to her, a stocky sergeant with a shaved head, shifted his chair slightly away from her. The message was clear. Colonel Brennan, the base commander, strode to the front of the room. He was a tall man in his 50s with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. "All right, settle down," he barked. "We've got a lot to cover. As you know, we're implementing a new special operations training program. This base has been selected because of our facilities and our personnel." He paused, looking around the room. "Some of you will be instructors. Some of you will provide support. All of you will represent Fort Henderson. I expect excellence." He went through the details of the program, the timeline, the objectives. Then he started introducing the training staff. "Your lead combat instructor is Captain Sarah Mitchell." Sarah stood up. Every eye in the room turned to her. She could feel the weight of their judgment. "Captain Mitchell comes to us with 12 years of service, including 3 combat deployments," Colonel Brennan continued. "She's Ranger qualified and has received multiple commendations for valor. I expect you all to give her your full cooperation." Sarah sat back down. The murmuring started immediately. "Ranger qualified, sure," someone whispered behind her. "Probably got pushed through," another voice added. After the meeting, Sarah gathered her materials and headed out. Colonel Brennan called her name. "Captain Mitchell, a word." She walked over to his desk. Up close, she could see the concern in his eyes. "I'm going to be straight with you," he said quietly. "You've got an uphill battle here. This is an old-fashioned base. A lot of these men have never served with women in combat roles. They're skeptical." "I understand, sir. I picked you because your record is exceptional, but you're going to have to prove yourself all over again. Can you handle that?" Sarah met his gaze. "Yes, sir, I can handle it." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the training field at 05:30. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. 42 recruits stood in formation, waiting. Sarah walked to the front and faced them. They were young, most of them in their early 20s. Their faces showed everything from curiosity to open contempt. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying across the field. "I'm Captain Mitchell, and I'll be your combat instructor for the next 12 weeks. This program is designed to push you beyond what you think you're capable of. Some of you won't make it. That's not a threat, it's a fact." A hand went up in the back. Sarah nodded at the recruit. "Yes, ma'am, I have a question," the young man said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What exactly qualifies you to teach us combat operations?" Sarah kept her face neutral. 12 years of service, 3 combat deployments, ranger school, and more field experience than you've had hot meals, recruit. Any other questions? Snickers rippled through the group. Another recruit spoke up without raising his hand. I heard they had to lower the standards so women could pass ranger school. That true? Sarah walked slowly toward him. What's your name? Recruit Thompson, ma'am. Tell me, Thompson, how many pull-ups can you do? 25, ma'am. How fast can you run 3 miles? 19 minutes, ma'am. Sarah nodded. That's good. That's very good. Now drop and give me 50 push-ups for speaking out of turn. Thompson's face reddened, but he dropped to the ground. The other recruits watched in silence. Anyone else want to question my qualifications? Sarah asked. No one spoke. Good, we're going to start with a 5-mile run. Full gear, move out. The groans were immediate, but the recruits scrambled to get their packs. Sarah shouldered her own ruck, weighted with 60 pounds of gear, and led them onto the desert trail. She set a brutal pace. Within the first mile, several recruits were struggling. By mile 3, a few had dropped out completely, sitting on the side of the trail with their heads between their knees. Sarah never slowed down. Her breath came steady and even, her legs pumping like pistons. This was what she was good at. This was where all the doubt and mockery fell away. Out here in the dirt and heat, there was only the mission. When she crossed the finish line, only 15 recruits were still with her. The rest straggled in over the next 20 minutes, red-faced and gasping. Pathetic, Sarah said, walking down the line. Half of you couldn't complete a simple run. How do you expect to survive in combat? Maybe if we had a real instructor instead of a quota hire, we'd be better prepared, someone muttered. Sarah spun around. Who said that? Silence. I said, who said that? A tall recruit with blonde hair stepped forward. I did, ma'am, Recruit Jensen. Sarah walked up to him until they were face to face. You think you're better than me, Jensen? I think I could take you in a fight, ma'am. No disrespect. The other recruits went quiet. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The moment their female instructor would back down or call for help. Sarah smiled. All right, Jensen, you and me, hand-to-hand combat right now in front of everyone. Jensen grinned. You sure about that, ma'am? Let's go. They moved to the combat training circle. The other recruits formed a ring around them, excitement buzzing through the group. Private Rodriguez appeared at the edge of the circle, her face worried. Jensen was 6'2" and probably weighed 200 pounds. He had reach and strength on his side, but Sarah had something he didn't have: experience. They circled each other. Jensen threw the first punch, a big haymaker that Sarah ducked easily. She swept his legs out from under him and he hit the ground hard. Before he could recover, she had him in an arm lock. Tap out, she said calmly. Jensen struggled for a moment, then tapped the ground. Sarah released him and stood up. Again, Jensen said, getting to his feet. They went 3 more rounds. Each time, Sarah put him on the ground. By the 4th round, Jensen was breathing hard, his face red with embarrassment. Anyone else? Sarah asked, looking around the circle. No one moved. Good, training continues tomorrow at 0600. Dismissed. As the recruits filed away, Sarah heard their whispers. She got lucky. Jensen went easy on her. This is ridiculous. Sarah stood alone in the circle watching them go. She'd won the fight, but she hadn't won their respect. Not yet. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Sarah pushed the recruits harder than any instructor they'd ever had. Early morning runs, hand-to-hand combat training, weapons qualification, tactical exercises in the desert heat. She demanded perfection and accepted nothing less. But the resistance only grew stronger. Equipment would go missing before her training sessions. Reports she filed would disappear from the system. The recruits showed up late, gave half-hearted effort, and questioned every decision she made. And it wasn't just the recruits anymore. Other instructors started making comments in the mess hall, loud enough for her to hear. "Heard Mitchell's class has the highest dropout rate in program history," one said. "Maybe she's just not cut out for teaching," another replied. Sarah kept her head down and kept working. She stayed later than everyone else, preparing the next day's training. She reviewed every recruit's performance, looking for ways to help them improve. She was determined to prove that she belonged here. Private Rodriguez became her only ally. The young woman worked tirelessly, setting up equipment, filing reports, and running interference with the administrative staff. "They're trying to push you out, ma'am," Rodriguez said one evening as they cleaned up the training area. "I've heard them talking. Some of the senior enlisted men went to Colonel Brennan and asked for a new instructor." Sarah paused, her jaw tightening. "What did the colonel say?" "He told them no. Said you're doing your job and they need to do theirs." Rodriguez hesitated. "But ma'am, there's something else. There's going to be a full base evaluation in 2 weeks. 3 generals are coming from the Pentagon to assess the new training program. If your class doesn't perform well, they might shut the whole thing down." Sarah closed her eyes. The pressure was mounting from all sides. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Rodriguez said quietly. "Why do you keep going? Why not request a transfer? Go somewhere they'd appreciate you." Sarah looked at the young private. "Because running away doesn't solve anything. Because if I quit, it makes it harder for the next woman who tries. And because my father taught me that a soldier never abandons her post, no matter how tough it gets." The next morning, Sarah arrived to find graffiti spray-painted on the equipment shed. The words were crude and offensive, attacking her gender and her qualifications. Her hands shook as she stared at it. Private Rodriguez appeared beside her, gasping when she saw the words. "I'll get maintenance to paint over it." "No," Sarah said quietly. "Leave it. I want everyone to see what we're dealing with." She ran the training session with the graffiti visible behind her. Several recruits smirked when they saw it. Others looked uncomfortable. Sarah said nothing about it, pushing them through an exhausting day of tactical exercises. That evening, Colonel Brennan called her to his office. "I saw the graffiti," he said, his face grave. "I've ordered an investigation. Whoever did it will face disciplinary action." "With respect, sir, an investigation won't change anything," Sarah said. "They don't want me here. They've made that clear." "You're right, they don't want you here." Brennan leaned forward. "But I do. Your training methods are sound. Your recruits are performing better than any previous class, even if they won't admit it. The dropout rate is high because you have standards. That's exactly what we need." "Then why does it feel like I'm fighting this battle alone?" Brennan sighed. "Because you are, and I'm sorry for that. But I believe in 2 weeks when those generals arrive, your recruits are going to show everyone what they're really made of. Can you hold on until then?" Sarah thought about her father, about all the times he'd faced opposition and pushed through. "Yes, sir, I can hold on." But the universe had other plans. 3 days before the evaluation, Sarah got word that her mother had been in a car accident. She was in the hospital in Phoenix, 2 hours away. The doctors said she was stable but asking for Sarah. Sarah stood in Colonel Brennan's office, torn between duty and family. "Go," Brennan said. "Family comes first. I'll have Captain Morrison cover your training for the day." Sarah drove to Phoenix, her mind racing. Her mother looked small in the hospital bed, her arm in a cast and bruises covering her face, but she was alive and conscious. "Sarah," she whispered, "you didn't have to come." "Of course I did, Mom." Sarah took her hand gently. "How are you feeling?" "I've been better," her mother smiled weakly. "How's the base? How's the training going?" Sarah hesitated, then told her everything. The mockery, the resistance, the graffiti, the constant battle to prove herself. Her mother listened quietly. "Your father faced something similar when he was a young officer," her mother said finally. He was small for a man and he came from a poor family, no military tradition. The other officers looked down on him, called him names, tried to push him out. "I never knew that," Sarah said. "He didn't talk about it much. But he told me once that the worst moments of his career taught him the most important lesson. That true respect isn't given because of rank or size or background. It's earned through action, through character, through never giving up even when everything tells you to quit." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom. I feel like I'm fighting a war I can't win." Her mother squeezed her hand. "You're Robert Mitchell's daughter. You were born for this fight. Don't you dare give up now." Sarah stayed until her mother fell asleep, then drove back to Fort Henderson. It was late when she arrived after midnight. The base was quiet, most of the lights off. She headed to her quarters, exhausted and emotionally drained. But as she walked past the training field, she noticed something. A light was on in the equipment shed. Sarah approached cautiously. Through the window, she could see several of her recruits inside, working on something. She pushed open the door. The recruits jumped, surprised. Jensen, Thompson, and 4 others stood there, paintbrushes in hand. They'd been painting over the graffiti. "Ma'am," Jensen said, his face flushing, "we were just—" "I can see what you're doing," Sarah said quietly. Thompson stepped forward. "Ma'am, we wanted you to know that whoever did this, it wasn't all of us. Some of us don't feel that way about you." Sarah looked at them, these young men who'd given her nothing but trouble for weeks. Why now? Why the change of heart? Jensen cleared his throat. "Captain Morrison ran our training today. He was good, but he wasn't you. He didn't push us the way you do, didn't expect as much from us. And we realize that everything you've been doing, all the hard training, it's not because you're trying to break us. It's because you're trying to make us better." "We're not saying everyone feels this way," another recruit added. "But some of us wanted you to know that we see you. We see how hard you work. And we're sorry for making this harder than it needed to be." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you, that means more than you know." She helped them finish painting, working side by side in silence. When they were done, the shed looked clean again, like the hate had never been there. As they cleaned up, Jensen spoke again. "Ma'am, these generals who are coming, we're going to show them what you've taught us. We're going to make you proud." The morning of the evaluation dawned clear and hot. Sarah stood on the parade ground at 0500, watching the sun rise over the desert. In a few hours, 3 generals from the Pentagon would arrive to assess the entire training program. Her recruits would be tested on everything they'd learned. Her methods would be judged. Her future at Fort Henderson hung in the balance. Private Rodriguez approached with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this, ma'am." "Thank you, Rodriguez." Sarah took the cup gratefully. "Are the recruits ready?" "Yes, ma'am. They've been up since 0400 checking their gear. Jensen's been running them through combat drills on his own time. They want to do well for you." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest. Not for me, for themselves. At 0800, 3 black SUVs rolled through the front gate. Sarah stood at attention with the other instructors as Colonel Brennan greeted the visitors. 3 generals stepped out, their uniforms crisp, their bearing commanding. Sarah couldn't see their faces from where she stood. The evaluation began with a review of physical fitness. Sarah's recruits ran the obstacle course while the generals watched from a raised platform. They were fast, efficient, working together to help each other over the walls and through the barriers. Sarah felt pride swelling in her chest. Next came weapons qualification. The recruits moved through the range with precision, their shots grouped tight around the targets. Even Thompson, who'd struggled with marksmanship at the beginning, put every round in the center mass. The tactical exercise was last. Sarah had designed a complex scenario involving hostage rescue in an urban environment. The recruits had to breach a building, neutralize threats, and extract civilians while under simulated fire. It was the hardest test she could give them. She watched from the control room as her recruits executed the mission. They moved like a team, communicating clearly, covering each other, making smart decisions under pressure. Jensen led his squad with confidence. Thompson provided covering fire with accuracy. Every recruit played their part perfectly. When it was over, the generals conferred quietly while Colonel Brennan joined Sarah in the control room. "Your recruits just scored the highest marks of any class we've evaluated today," he said, unable to hide his smile. "Whatever you're doing, Captain, it's working." Sarah felt relief wash over her, but she kept her expression neutral. "They did the work, sir. I just pointed them in the right direction." Don't sell yourself short. You turned a group of skeptical, undisciplined recruits into a cohesive unit in less than a month. That's remarkable. The generals requested a meeting with all the instructors. Sarah filed into the conference room with the others, taking a seat near the back. The three generals sat at the front of the room, and for the first time, Sarah got a clear look at their faces. Her heart stopped. The general in the middle was a tall man with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, General Frank Morrison. The general on the left was a stocky woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, General Patricia Hayes, and the general on the right was a man with dark skin and a quiet, commanding presence, General Marcus Johnson. Sarah knew all three of them. She'd served with all three of them, in different times, different places, different wars. General Morrison had been her commanding officer in Afghanistan during her first deployment. She'd saved his life during an ambush, pulling him to safety while under heavy fire. He'd put her in for a Silver Star. General Hayes had led a joint operation in Iraq that Sarah had been part of. When their convoy was hit by an IED, Sarah had coordinated the defense and evacuation while Hayes was injured. Hayes had personally recommended Sarah for Ranger School. General Johnson had worked with Sarah on a classified mission that Sarah couldn't talk about, but she knew he'd written in his report that Sarah was one of the finest soldiers he'd ever served with. They hadn't recognized her yet. She'd been just one of many soldiers in combat fatigues and tactical gear back then. Here, in her dress uniform, sitting among 24 other officers, she was invisible. General Morrison began speaking. "We've been impressed with what we've seen today. The training program shows real promise, but we have some concerns about consistency across instructors. Some of you are producing excellent results. Others are falling short." He looked down at his notes. "I'd like to hear from Captain Sarah Mitchell, who's leading the combat instruction program. Captain Mitchell, can you stand, please?" Sarah stood, her heart pounding. General Morrison looked up and his eyes met hers. His expression froze. Then his eyes widened in recognition. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. General Hayes looked over sharply, her gaze focusing on Sarah. Her hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God, Sarah Mitchell." General Johnson stood up slowly, his eyes locked on Sarah. "Captain Mitchell, is that really you?" The room went completely silent. Every officer turned to stare at Sarah, then at the generals, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. "Yes, sir," Sarah said quietly, "it's me." General Morrison came around the table. General Hayes and General Johnson followed. Sarah's fellow instructors watched in stunned silence as all three generals walked straight toward her. Then, in perfect unison, all three generals dropped to one knee. The room gasped. Several officers stood up in shock. This was unheard of. Generals didn't kneel to captains. Generals didn't kneel to anyone. "What are you doing?" Sarah whispered urgently. "Please, sirs, stand up." "No," General Morrison said firmly, his eyes glistening. "Sarah Mitchell saved my life in Kandahar. She pulled me from a burning vehicle while bullets were flying everywhere. She took shrapnel in her back protecting me. I owe her my life." General Hayes spoke next, her voice thick with emotion. "Sarah coordinated a defense under fire that saved 17 lives, including mine. She was 23 years old and had been in country for 2 months. She led like a veteran with 20 years of experience. General Johnson's voice was quiet but clear. Sarah Mitchell completed a mission that I cannot discuss in this room, but I can tell you that her actions directly led to saving hundreds of American lives. She's one of the most decorated soldiers of her generation, and she never talks about it, never brags, never asks for recognition. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "Please, sirs, you're embarrassing me." "You should be embarrassed," General Morrison said, finally standing. The other two generals followed. "Embarrassed that you've been serving at this base for a month, and nobody knew who you really are. Embarrassed that soldiers under your command didn't know they were being trained by a genuine American hero." He turned to face the room. "Captain Sarah Mitchell has 3 silver stars, 2 bronze stars with valor, a Purple Heart, and a classified commendation that I'm not at liberty to discuss. She's Ranger qualified, Airborne qualified, and has more combat experience than most of the people in this room combined. And from what I've seen today, she's turned her recruits into the best performing unit in this program." Colonel Brennan stood up, his face showing a mixture of shock and shame. "Captain Mitchell, I had no idea. Your file didn't show." "I requested a clean file for this assignment, sir," Sarah said quietly. "I wanted to be judged on my teaching, not my past." "Well, you've been judged," General Hayes said firmly, "and you've exceeded every expectation." She looked around the room. "This is the soldier who should be running this entire program. This is the standard you should all aspire to." The other instructors sat in stunned silence. Some looked ashamed, others looked amazed, a few looked like they wanted to disappear. General Morrison put his hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I think we need to have a private conversation with you, Captain, and with Colonel Brennan. The rest of you are dismissed." The private office felt small with 3 generals inside. Sarah sat across from them, with Colonel Brennan at the head of the table. The shock was starting to wear off, replaced by exhaustion. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" General Hayes asked gently. "Why hide your service record?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Because everywhere I go, I'm either invisible or I'm a symbol. Either people don't see me as a real soldier, or they put me on a pedestal and expect me to be some kind of superhero. I just wanted to be a regular instructor. I wanted my recruits to respect me for what I taught them, not because of medals I earned years ago." "And how did that work out?" General Johnson asked with a slight smile. Sarah laughed bitterly. "Not well, sir. Turns out being invisible comes with its own problems." General Morrison leaned forward. "Sarah, we're here to offer you something. The Pentagon is creating a new elite training program. We want the best instructors in the military. We want you to lead it." Sarah's eyes widened. "Sir, I'm honored, but—" "Before you answer, let me finish," Morrison continued. "This wouldn't be at Fort Henderson. It would be at Fort Benning. You'd have full authority to design the curriculum, select your staff, and run the program as you see fit. You'd be promoted to major immediately, with a path to lieutenant colonel within 2 years. It's a career-making opportunity." Sarah sat back in her chair. This was everything she'd worked for: recognition, authority, a chance to shape the future of military training, but something held her back. "Can I ask a question, sir?" Sarah said. "Of course." "What happens to the program here if I leave? What happens to my recruits?" Colonel Brennan spoke up. "We'd assign a new instructor, continue with the existing curriculum." Sarah shook her head. "That's not good enough. These recruits have come so far. They deserve to finish what we started. And this base, Fort Henderson, it was my father's last post. There's unfinished business here." General Hayes studied her carefully. "What are you saying, Captain?" "I'm saying I want to stay here, finish the training cycle with my current recruits, and then if you still want me for that program at Fort Benning, we can talk." Sarah paused. "But more than that, I want to change things here. The culture that made it okay to mock me, to vandalize property, to create a hostile environment for female soldiers, that needs to change. And running away to a new assignment doesn't change it. The three generals exchanged glances. General Johnson smiled. That's the Sarah Mitchell I remember, never takes the easy path. All right, General Morrison said. You finish the training cycle here. We'll keep the position at Fort Benning open. But in the meantime, we're going to make some changes at this base, starting with a full investigation into the hostile environment you described. And Captain Mitchell, General Hayes added, you're being promoted to major effective immediately. Your service record will be fully restored. No more hiding. People need to know who you are and what you've accomplished. That evening, word spread across Fort Henderson like wildfire. The quiet female instructor who everyone had mocked was actually a decorated war hero. The generals had knelt before her. The story grew with each retelling, taking on legendary proportions. Sarah walked across the base to the mess hall for dinner. The usual chatter died down when she entered. Soldiers stood at attention, even though she'd told them it wasn't necessary. Their faces showed respect, admiration, and for some, shame. Jensen and Thompson approached her table. Ma'am, can we sit with you? Of course. They sat down, both looking uncomfortable. Finally, Jensen spoke. We wanted to apologize not just for us but for everyone who doubted you. We were wrong, we were stupid, and we're sorry. Apology accepted, Sarah said. But you need to understand something. I didn't hide my record to trick you. I did it because I wanted you to learn to respect all soldiers, regardless of their gender or size or background. Because someday, you might serve with someone who doesn't have a file full of medals, but who's just as capable and just as brave. And they deserve your respect too. Thompson nodded. We get that now, and we're going to do better. Over the next few weeks, Fort Henderson transformed. Colonel Brennan implemented new policies against harassment and discrimination. Mandatory training on inclusive leadership became part of every officer's schedule. The soldier who'd painted the graffiti was identified and court-martialed. Others who'd participated in the mockery received formal reprimands. But more than the official changes, something shifted in the culture. Sarah's recruits talked openly about what they'd learned from her. Other female soldiers on base felt empowered to speak up about their own experiences. Male soldiers who'd been silent allies found their voices. Private Rodriguez was promoted to corporal and received a commendation for her outstanding support. I learned from the best, she told Sarah with tears in her eyes. The training cycle ended 12 weeks after it began. Sarah's recruits graduated at the top of their class. Every single one of them passed, a record for the program. At the graduation ceremony, with families and friends watching, Jensen gave a speech on behalf of his fellow graduates. When we started this training, we thought we knew what it meant to be a soldier, he said, his voice carrying across the parade ground. We thought it was about being tough, being strong, being fearless. But Major Mitchell taught us different. She taught us that being a soldier is about character, about dedication, about never giving up even when everyone's against you. She taught us by example, and we're better soldiers because of her. Sarah stood with the other officers, her mother in a wheelchair in the front row, beaming with pride. The generals had returned for the ceremony. As the recruits marched past in review, General Morrison leaned over to Sarah. Still want to stay here? He asked. Or are you ready for that assignment at Fort Benning? Sarah watched her recruits, their heads high, their steps precise. She thought about her father, about the legacy he'd left behind. She thought about all the young soldiers, especially the young women, who needed to see that it was possible to succeed despite the obstacles. I'm ready, sir, she said, but I have one condition. What's that? I want to bring Corporal Rodriguez with me, and I want permission to create a mentorship program that brings female soldiers from different bases to train at Fort Benning. We need to build a network, a support system, so no woman has to fight these battles alone. General Hayes smiled. Consider it done. 6 months later, Sarah stood in her new office at Fort Benning. Photos lined the walls, pictures of her father in his uniform, her mother at her promotion ceremony, her first class of recruits at Fort Henderson. Corporal Rodriguez, now Sergeant Rodriguez, worked at the desk outside. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A young female lieutenant stood in the doorway, looking nervous. "Major Mitchell, I'm Lieutenant Chen. I'm reporting for the new instructor training program." Sarah smiled and gestured to a chair. "Welcome, Lieutenant. Before we begin, I want you to know something. You're going to face challenges here. Some people might doubt you because of your gender. They might underestimate you. They might try to push you out." Lieutenant Chen nodded, her jaw set. "I'm ready for it, ma'am." "I know you are, but I also want you to know that you're not alone. You have allies here, you have mentors, and you have a community of women who have walked this path before you. We've got your back." The lieutenant's eyes glistened. "Thank you, ma'am, that means everything." As Sarah began the orientation, she thought about how far she'd come. From the daughter of a colonel who grew up on military bases, to the combat veteran who'd saved lives in faraway wars, to the instructor who'd been mocked and doubted, to the leader who was now shaping the future of military training. Her father had been right. Being a soldier wasn't about being the biggest or the loudest. It was about heart, about never quitting, about standing up for what's right even when everyone's against you. And now, Sarah Mitchell was making sure that every soldier who came through her program learned that same lesson, not through speeches or lectures, but through example, through action, through the simple act of showing up every day and doing the work, no matter how hard it got. That evening, Sarah returned to her quarters and called her mother. "How was your first day at the new assignment?" her mother asked. "Good, really good actually." Sarah paused. "Mom, I think Dad would be proud." "Oh, sweetheart," her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "He's been proud of you every single day, and so am I." Sarah looked out the window at the base where she'd spent so many years as a child, watching her father work, dreaming of the day she'd wear the uniform too. She'd faced battles he never had to fight, overcome obstacles he couldn't have imagined. But she'd done it with the strength and courage he'd instilled in her. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn and went for a run. The Georgia air was humid, different from the Arizona desert she'd left behind. But the base was the same in all the ways that mattered. Soldiers training, working together, preparing to serve their country. As she ran past the training fields, she saw her new recruits gathering for their first day. Among them were several women standing tall and ready. They didn't know it yet, but they were part of something bigger, part of a change that was sweeping through the military. A change that said every soldier, regardless of gender, deserved respect and opportunity. Sarah had fought for that change. She'd endured the mockery and the doubt. She'd proved herself over and over again. And now she was making sure that the next generation wouldn't have to fight quite as hard. Because that's what true leadership was. Not collecting medals or earning accolades, but making the path easier for those who came after you. Sarah Mitchell had found her purpose, and she was just getting started.